From east of the Mississippi, investigating the unknown. Welcome to the show. I want to do a little deep dive here into some of the North American history that we don't hear enough about. Also, I'm about to do something with a researcher from Scandinavia, and it's got me thinking about the Norse and how their connection to the Americas is often overlooked. And I'll just pull up this ship here, and we'll start with that. This is what used to connect America with Scandinavia. And sometimes when I hear a big, epic metal song, I picture this. I see this. Sailing those dark, stormy seas. And maybe I even feel the warrior spirit come over me. And I get this feeling of something akin to, I don't know, the triumph of the ancestors. Because these were people who were really existed. They really built this ship. This ship in particular is dug up. This is a real ship. They just buried it. So you could see the details along the edge of the front of the ship. This is real. And these people, they were in tune with stars and with nature, and they buried these boats. If you look up Viking burial ships, you're going to come across some of these. This one in particular is the Osberg ship. It dates from 820 AD. And there's another ship that was found on a Norwegian island that dates to 700 AD. I think they came here. I'm going to show that today. And I know they went as far as the Middle East because items and goods from the Middle East were found in association with some of these ships in digs in ancient sites. These guys went all over, really. I don't know that they were all these pagan brutes that were just sitting around drinking mead on a boat trying to war. I think some of these guys were probably well-traveled, eclectic, cultured people. They could read, they could write. Their runes are very complex. And of course, they left inscriptions in stone as well. One good example of that is the Kensington runestone. I'm going to pull that up. They found this runestone in Minnesota in 1898 on a remote farm. My favorite part of the story is the guy who found it was a Swedish immigrant. His name is Olaf Ullman. He found this on his property, and I don't know, he must have thought that his ancestors appointed him specifically to find this or something. It's amazing that it just happened to be a Swedish guy who found this. And the way the story goes, he unearthed this stone in his field. It was in Salem Township in Douglas County, Minnesota. And it was later named the Kensington stone after a nearby settlement called Kensington. When the stone was translated, it told the story of an exploring party of Norsemen who came to Minnesota in 1362. The general translation of this reads, "We are 8 Goths are Swedes, and 22 Norwegians on an exploration journey from Vinland through the west. We had a camp by a lake with 2 skerries. Skerries are small rocky islands. We camped one day's journey north from this stone. We were out and fished one day. After we came home, we found 10 of our men red with blood and dead. Then they put these letters AMV on the stone. And then they said, save us from evil. AMV, it's speculated it might mean Hail Virgin Mary or something along those lines. Then they go on to say, we have 10 of our party by the sea to look after our ships, 14 days' journey from this island, year 1362. So a group of these guys went out to fish. I imagine they went out to sort of fetch dinner. They left a couple guys behind to watch the camp. When they returned, these guys were dead mysteriously. They were killed by natives. We don't know what happened. It could have been Sasquatch for all we know. Wendigo. Yeah, I don't know. I've heard some pretty crazy stories. I've heard, just for fun here, I have heard strange stories involving Sasquatch like characters where involving guys who were explorers or in hunting parties. So who knows? You can't believe all of the accounts, right? But you can't disbelieve all of the accounts either. A raiding local tribe of natives possibly killed these guys. Whatever happened, I get the impression that they left this message in stone for later parties of Swedes. Like a danger sign, like a beware of these lands sign. But the main takeaway for me is this. In 1362, obviously the Norsemen sailed the ocean blue. They predated Columbus. For me, this points to Scandinavians having been coming here for a long time. Sweden was also Finland at one time. It was a country with a lot of coastline, and they were most certainly seafaring navigators utilizing that coastline. They learned how to work the waters. They learned how to navigate using the stars. They learned how to build these boats, and they became proficient explorers. And I'll add this in too. This is a fairly big stone. Here, I'll pull up another picture of this. Here's a picture of Olaf Ullman with the stone he found, of course, on his property. This is a decent sized stone, which kind of gets into another thing. Someone was coming over here to the Americas who knew how to move big stones, possibly with sound. Maybe not this particular stone. This Kensington rune stone here possibly could have been moved by a few guys. But there are other stones over here like Jefferson Rock or Balanced Rock in New York that are far too big to be moved by physical strength. I'll probably go into that more in another episode. It just kind of gets into some of the strange technologies that the people who were coming here seemed to possess. But for me, I don't care who moved the stone. In 1362, the Norsemen sailed the ocean blue. And I think also that the Icelandic sagas also confirm that. They confirm voyages to the Americas as far back as 1000 AD. Those sagas mention the Vikings going to Vinland. Vinland is East Coast North America. So the Norse were coming here. I'll pull this up. This is a village I found from 1000 AD. And this is a find that I just don't hear being talked about enough. Pull up Wikipedia on this one. I might actually break protocol and just flat out use this Wikipedia article actually, because I think this particular article is honest. This entry here is specific to one of the Norse villages that I'm talking about. I don't think it gets enough airplay, so I'll just go into it here. Vinland was an area of coastal North America explored by the Vikings. Leif Erikson landed there around 1000 AD. That was nearly 5 centuries before the voyages of Christopher Columbus and John Cabot. The name also appears in the Vinland sagas and describes Newfoundland and the Gulf of St. Lawrence as far as northeastern New Brunswick. So there's this area here that these guys were coming to that stretches from Newfoundland to New Brunswick. Of course, I don't think they stayed in that area very long. I think they migrated down the coast to New England. This article says much of the geographical content of the sagas corresponds to present day knowledge of transatlantic travel in North America. There's a picture here in the middle of a longhouse over here in New England, or over in Newfoundland, I should say. In 1960, archaeological evidence of the only known Norse site in America, Lance Ox Meadows, was found on the northern tip of the island of Newfoundland. I don't think it's the only Norse site in America, by the way. Before the discovery of the archaeological evidence, Vinland was known only from the sagas and medieval historiography. So the site kind of confirms that Vinland is actually North America. The 1960 discovery further proved that the pre-Columbian Norse exploration of mainland North America did happen. And this Lance Ox Meadows has been hypothesized to be the same camp called Stromfjord mentioned in the saga of Eric the Red. So at least since 1000 AD, this is proof to me that the Norse were coming here. I would go so far as to say, at this point, I assure you that they beat Columbus. And I imagine that that's partly why you have seen that holiday seem to disappear. That holiday has dissipated from the calendars recently. I want to say something too about a previous episode with Fritz Zimmerman. I mentioned in that tribe a light skinned, I mentioned light skinned tribes in that episode, is what I'm trying to say. And I don't necessarily like the term. I suppose at the end of the day, I'm probably indifferent to it, but it is what it is. Just to be clear, when I was talking about light skinned tribes, I was referring to these reports of Indians here who mysteriously spoke Celtic and Welsh. And I saw one old report that said some of the natives had the light hair of the Swedes. And in addition to that, of course, there are accounts of natives with blue eyes and red hair as well. And in addition to that, Lewis and Clark also encountered so-called Welsh Indians at the mouth of the Mississippi River. And then furthermore, they found more of these light-skinned tribes when they went into the Appalachian Mountain region during their explorations. And so for all intents and purposes, there seems to have been light-skinned tribes here. I don't know how plentiful they were, but they were here. And even further out west, we see traces of the Norse being here or Europeans being here. They pulled a big non-native, possibly European, possibly Norse guy out of Spiro Mound. Spiro Mound is in Oklahoma, right off the Arkansas River. Because remember, these rivers were superhighways. Nearby to Spiro Mound is Heavener, where more rooms were found. That reads like it's supposed to be pronounced Heavener, but I think the locals call that Heavener. So if you want to look it up, it's the Heavener runestones. They were discovered in 1923. But back to Minnesota, where this runestone shows up, there's also a Finland state forest in Minnesota. And then, of course, in Minnesota, you have Minneapolis. And Minneapolis, I think, is more than likely built on top of an ancient city. There was the Great Minneapolis Fire of 1893 that destroyed 23 blocks of that city. Events like that tend to erase a lot of history. And, I'll just put out some more speculation here. I do think that Minneapolis is an ancient city. That's not, I'll go more into that later, but just to speculate, if you come here from Scandinavia, and in the case of this Kensington runestone, you go out fishing, you come back, half your party's mysteriously killed. The next time you come through the area, you're going to spend more time fortifying. You're going to establish a small town or village on the water, on the superhighway that is the Mississippi. And these Norse, they brought their legends with them. I think they brought supernatural energies with them as well. I do think that they would have established villages and towns here that may have went on to later become cities one day, cities that are still around today. So I'm very interested in how Scandinavian folklore fits into all this. I think some of their mythology might fit in with these ancient sites over here. So, I'll start with uh, some of the more interesting Viking mythologies that I've read and looked into. We know the Vikings were master navigators who had their own cosmology. They tracked the seasons using the stars and they used the solstices as markers. They had their own astronomy that was spread throughout the Norse and Scandinavian people. And it looks like in their system of astronomy, they acknowledged 12 moon phases, just like we have 12 months. They had 12 of the Valkyries, who were the female keepers of the moon calendar. They broke the 12 months into two groups of six. They did 6 dark months and 6 light months, signified, of course, by the winter solstice and the summer solstice. From what I could find, there are 36 of these female Valkyries, but they had 12 of those who were, like I say, uh, they signified the moon calendar, the 12 months, if you will. And this system, there are earthworks over here that align with this system, that align with the same lunar and solar alignments. In fact, there's plenty of sites in the Americas here that demonstrate this connection with the solstices. I'll go into one here today and see if I can pull this up here. This is a very interesting site. So here's a map. You'll see Plymouth, bottom right, and the red balloon, the red circle here in at the bottom left, middle to bottom left. This is what is being called the Foxborough prayer seats. And I just want to point out how close this is to where the pilgrims landed. And funny enough, if you draw a line from Plymouth to the Foxborough prayer seats, this area in between is actually Bridgewater and then the Hockomock Swamp. They call this area the Bridgewater Triangle. It's known for strange paranormal cryptid activity. There's a documentary out called The Bridgewater Triangle, all about how weird this area is. It's just a beacon of high strangeness, really. And then the Hockomock Swamp is equally as weird, there's a guy, I'm trying to get him to come on. There's a guy who solely, I think, solely investigates just the Hockomock Swamp. He goes out there and he gets all these EMF readings and everything else, and it's just a hotspot for paranormal activity. And that's right in the middle of Plymouth Rock and the Foxborough Prayer Seats. But why I wanted to bring this into focus is because these prayer seats align with the solstices. We call this archaeoastronomy today. It's only been a study since the 60s, but these ancient people knew all about this. Even even the medicine wheels of the great American West align to the solstices. But with these Foxborough prayer seats, I just find it rather ironic that, it's so close to Plymouth Rock. It's near where the pilgrims landed. And it's this older site. You have this event associated with the first Europeans coming here next to a site built by people who are possibly European, who possibly predate the pilgrims. And I think it's in the Foxborough State Forest. Don't quote me on that, but these prayer seats, if you are, there are these big, some of them megalithic blocks that form a stone structure in the shape of a U. They're out there scattered around this forest. If you sit inside the seat and you face out, you're facing the sunrise at the winter solstice and the sunset at the summer solstice. Ancient people are using this for something. I get the mental picture of an ancient group of people who are sitting in these seats watching these sunsets and sunrises. And I'd imagine that there's a ritual going on in the background or associated with it as well. When it comes to these alignments with the solstices, this is knowledge that potentially came from the Norse or from Europe, close by Europe. You know, Speaking of Fritz Zimmerman, he told me his theory is that Joshua forced the Amorites out of the Middle East. They went from the Middle East to Europe. They built Stonehenge. They're the same group of people known as the Beaker people today. They knew how to use the solstices. They knew the solar lunar alignments. They had boats. They came here, they migrated over here, and they brought their Stonehenge knowledge with them. That's one theory. They seemed to possess knowledge that is borderline supernatural when you start looking into the complexities of these ancient sites. When you look, Fritz was talking about the Newark earthworks in Ohio and how whoever built those had to have a good grasp of trigonometry. There's an element here of something strange, something, perhaps supernatural. I was looking into the Valkyries. Like I said, I found that there were 36 of them. Maybe there's more. This is old, old stuff. The information is scarce. But I looked into one of the Valkyries and I found some interesting information. Let me pull up a Valkyrie here. Here's an older drawing of a Valkyrie, a celestial entity in the form of a woman talking to a crow. One of the Valkyries that I came across that I found interesting that I looked into is named Rangrid, the Shield Destroyer. According to one legend, after she kind of did some, mythological stuff, she was sent to Nephilim or Nephilim, Nephilim. In Norse mythology, Nephilim is one of the 9 worlds that's interconnected by the world tree. It's a land where the oldest rivers existed at the beginning of the world. It reminds me a lot of Hyperborea, especially when you add in the concept of light bringers of the north and the subsequent studies that follow or trickle down from that, like theosophy, like Helena Blavatsky, and just that late 1800s fascination with northern Atlantean like civilizations. That's what this kind of points back to in a lot of ways for me. But back to this Nephilim, it's said to be a realm of ice, possibly home to an ancient race of ice giants, which, well, then it dawned on me Nephilim, this realm, that word sounds a lot like Nephilim. And if you aren't familiar with the Nephilim, it's this concept, it's this group called the sons of God. They're these celestial entities. They came down to earth. They had relations with the daughters of men so that they could incarnate and bring themselves into this dimension. So at this point, I realized there might be some metaphysical connections here. And then I found this book called The Night Side of the Runes. I just kind of wanted to see what the Vikings were really cooking with. Were they really tapping into more supernatural elements like their mythology suggests? And also, I'm thinking, what if their language, what if the runes are interwoven with the spiritual realm? What if the runes themselves are symbols, are magical symbols? So I looked at this book. I will say this. I'm not positive, but this book was possibly written by an occultist, but not to worry. I went there so you don't have to. You can keep your distance and allow me to intermediate with such material. Tim Constantine at patreon.com if you want to see more shows like this. I walk to the edge and peer into the darkness for you. And in this case, I'm glad I looked because I found some absolute gems. Found out about a guy from the late 1500s who studied the mystical nature of the actual runes themselves. And this book, Night Side of the Runes, backs this up. His name was Johannes Beres, and he studied the spiritual dimensions of the runes and their connection to the Kabbalah, the Kabbalah. And I'll read this passage here from this book. It says, Johannes Beres is not only considered to be the father of modern scientific runology, but he is also an early leader of the international Rosicrucian movement of the 16th century. He was innovative on 2 fronts. First, he scientifically learned to read and record the runes, which he found in his native country, which was Sweden. Second, he brought the spiritual insights of the Paracelsian Revolution to the lore of the runes in an unexpected way. And what I found was that this guy, Beres, he was both this scholar and this mystic. And he was also into astronomy. These guys from back in the day, they were fascinating. There's a story about Beres that he and Tycho Brahe witnessed what they called the new star supernova of 1572. They saw this thing in the night sky. They saw it as a mystical event, almost like today, like some would see an eclipse to be like this vector for change. Beres, he was also into the Paracelsian writings, which aimed for world reform based on alchemy and spiritual revolution. So the supernova combined with this Paracelsian spiritual revolution of the day, it was very influential on Beres. And This is all happening. There's revolution in the air. And he's also studying the runes and the runestones. And he started collecting a vast material on runestones. And what he did was he showed that the runes had an occult side similar to the letter mysticism and the numerology of the Kabbalah. He called the system of hidden runes Adel runes. Basically, he was saying that there are hidden messages within the runes. So with runes, you have supernatural energy. All in all, it makes me see the Vikings and the Norsemen in a different light. It's also interesting that it ties into Paracelsus and alchemy, because I'm going to do a show on that and that revolution. There's a lot of very interesting stuff to do with these guys and what they were into. So I'm going to circle back to the beginning where I showed that ship. And here, I'll just pull it up again. These having pictures seems to slow me down a little bit, but you know, why not? I think that this ship is super cool. Just the fact that they dug this thing up and it's in such pristine condition. And when you look at close-up pictures of some of the woodwork and the wood carvings and some of the little altars and stuff, little trinkets and things that were on this boat, it is very fascinating. You can even see the oars here on the sides, sitting in their little holders. You look at this, you look at the shipbuilding of the Vikings. And I realized when I saw this that they're way more advanced than we're giving them credit for. In addition to their accomplishments as shipbuilders and as navigators, this language, these runes, is more advanced and more mysteriously spiritual than is often acknowledged. In fact, I've got an episode coming up on this subject with a guy from Sweden named Jake Hagström. You're definitely going to want to listen to that. Even if that podcast goes long, and if we start getting nerdy, an hour into a conversation with a guy like that is when the mind-blowing information starts to show up. Trust me. You're going to want to listen to that episode. We're going to go more in depth into this. He has vast knowledge on the runes and just this whole culture and how it fits into history and just all the intricate details of that. It's a very interesting nation. You know, Sweden and Finland are now their two nations, of course, but that region is so fascinating. But check out my Patreon. Please help support my research. I have content like this that I'm waiting to just pour into that Patreon. So please consider joining that. I'm really trying to make this a place where you can see a new side to life and a new meaning behind things. You know, I mean, the world, this is a magical place. And what I'm trying to do is I wanted to create a show that highlights that. So I appreciate all of you who support this show on a weekly basis. And everyone who tunes in and continues to show me love and just kind of support what I'm doing here. Thank you so much. As always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.